We were standing in the kitchen when he said it. Not during a screaming fight. Not in the middle of some dramatic confrontation. Just standing there, him washing dishes and me drying them like it was the most normal thing in the world to say. I still compare you to her every day. The words came out quietly, almost casually, like he was mentioning the weather or commenting on dinner. But they landed in the space between us with devastating weight. The room went completely silent except for the running water. My hands didn't shake where they held the dish towel. My face didn't change expression. But something inside my chest burned so hot and sharp I thought I might stop breathing. He kept washing dishes like he hadn't just detonated something fundamental between us. Like those words were nothing. Like this was just information I should know. We were 3 weeks away from our wedding. 3 weeks. The deposits were already paid. My dress was hanging in the closet upstairs. The invitations had been mailed. My entire future was already arranged around this man standing beside me at the sink. And suddenly, standing in my own kitchen holding a wet plate, I understood something with perfect, horrible clarity. I had been living in someone else's shadow this entire time. Competing in a race I never agreed to enter. Being measured against a standard I could never meet because it wasn't real. It was memory wrapped in nostalgia. He thought this was honesty. He thought this confession should earn him credit for being vulnerable and real with me. I set down the plate carefully and turned to look at him directly. My voice came out steady even though my heart was hammering. Why are you telling me this? He shrugged. She shrugged. Like the question was unnecessary. Like the answer was obvious. I thought I should be honest with you, he said, still not looking at me. Isn't that what you always want? For me to be open about what I'm feeling? That shrug. That casual, dismissive gesture. That's what changed everything for me in that moment. Not the confession itself. Not the admission that he measured me daily against a woman who was supposed to be in his past. But the shrug. The implication that this was normal. Natural. Something I should accept and understand. And how do I compare? Asked quietly, testing. Seeing how deep this actually went. He finally looked at me then. His expression almost surprised by the question. You're different, he said carefully. Not better or worse. Just different. But I could see the truth in his eyes. I wasn't better. I was the compromise. The acceptable alternative. The woman he chose when he couldn't have who he really wanted. Do you love me? He asked. Of course, he replied immediately. That's why I'm being honest with you. I love you enough to tell you the truth. But love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't supposed to come with comparisons and measurements and rankings. This felt like something else entirely. That shrug replayed in my mind. Casual, unconcerned, confident that I would accept this. And right then I decided something crucial. I would not argue. Not yet. I felt anger rising in my chest. Hot and sharp and demanding to be released. Every instinct I had screamed at me to yell, to cry, to demand answers and explanations and apologies. But I swallowed it all down, forced it back, made my face stay calm and neutral, because I needed to understand before I reacted. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I made any decisions about what came next. Reacting emotionally now would give him power. It would let him frame this as me being insecure or jealous or dramatic. It would make me the problem instead of keeping the focus on what he had just revealed. Okay, I said simply. Thank you for telling me. He looked relieved. Actually relieved. Like he had expected this to be harder. Like he thought I would make a scene and he was grateful I was being so reasonable about it. I'm glad you understand, he said, kissing my forehead. This is why I love you, Autumn. You're so mature about things. Mature. That word that men used when they wanted women to accept unacceptable situations without complaint. I nodded and went back to drying dishes. Let him think the conversation was over. Let him believe I had accepted his confession and moved on. But inside my mind was racing, processing, analyzing, beginning to piece together every moment of our relationship through this new, devastating lens. I decided right then that I would not argue or fight to prove my worth. I would not compete with a ghost. I would not beg him to see me clearly. I would simply observe, document, prepare, and then I would leave on my own terms. My name is Autumn Harrington. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a senior accountant for a regional consulting firm. I've been with my fiancé, Connor Wells, for 3 years. Until that moment in the kitchen, I believed that patience was the highest form of love, that being chosen meant being secure, that if I just loved him well enough, consistently enough, he would eventually see me as enough. I had sacrificed so much for this relationship. I relocated for his job, leaving behind friends and a promotion I had worked years to earn. I adjusted my career path to accommodate his schedule and needs. I paid for more than my share of expenses when his business was struggling. I supported him through every doubt and fear and moment of uncertainty. I learned to cook his favorite meals. I organized our home the way he liked it. I made friends with his family even when they were cold to me at first. I planned our entire wedding mostly alone because he was too busy with work. I had molded myself into the shape he seemed to need. I had been flexible and understanding and endlessly accommodating. I thought I was being a good partner, building something real and lasting. This wasn't casual love. This wasn't a relationship I had entered lightly or without intention. I had invested everything, my time, my energy, my future, into making this work. And in one casual sentence over dirty dishes, Connor had revealed that none of it mattered. That while I was building a life with him, he was still emotionally anchored to someone else, measuring everything I did against her, quietly resenting me for not being her. Lying in bed that night, unable to sleep, my mind kept circling back through our relationship, looking for signs I had missed, patterns I had ignored because I wanted to believe everything was fine. The subtle comments came back to me with new clarity. Little things Connor had said over the years that I had dismissed or explained away. Vanessa used to make this dish differently. When I cooked for him, that's not how Vanessa handled conflict. When we had disagreements, Vanessa was more spontaneous. When I wanted to plan things in advance, always Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend, the woman he dated for 2 years before me. The relationship he claimed ended mutually and amicably. The past he swore didn't matter anymore. But her name came up constantly. In small ways. Casual mentions that he probably didn't even notice anymore. References to how she did things. Or she liked. How she thought. I had absorbed each comment like a small cut. Not deep enough to be alarming on its own. But collectively, over 3 years they had carved something out of me. My confidence. My sense of being enough. I started noticing how often he checked his phone after mentioning her. How his expression changed when mutual friends brought her up. How defensive he got when I asked simple questions about their relationship. I finally saw the pattern clearly. I had been competing this whole time without realizing it. Being scored against someone who wasn't even present. Losing points for every way I was different from her. And I understood with cold certainty that I was never supposed to win this competition. The next morning, Connor seemed lighter, happier. Like confessing his ongoing comparison had relieved some burden he'd been carrying. Over coffee, he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm really glad we talked last night," he said warmly. "I feel closer to you now. More honest." I forced a smile. "I'm glad too. And you know," he continued, "in a lot of ways you're actually better than Vanessa was. More stable. More reliable. She was always so unpredictable. Better." He was trying to reassure me by ranking me above her in certain categories. Like I should feel grateful for placing first in stability and reliability. But his words confirmed what I had realized during my sleepless night. This was never about me being good enough. It was about me being different. And that difference would always be measured against someone else. I couldn't win because winning meant being her. And I could never be her. I could only be a version of myself that approximated what he remembered wanting. "Thanks," I said quietly, pulling my hand away to pick up my coffee. He didn't notice my withdrawal. Didn't see how his attempt at reassurance had actually made everything worse. He went to work feeling good about our relationship. Feeling like he had handled things well. Feeling secure that I understood and accepted my position in his emotional hierarchy. And I sat at our kitchen table, staring at my coffee, understanding that I was never supposed to win. The game was rigged from the start. The prize wasn't actually available. I just had to decide what to do with that information. I stopped defending myself after that conversation. Stopped trying to prove I was good enough or explain why his comparisons hurt. Stopped hoping he would suddenly see me clearly. Instead, I started observing him. Really watching. Paying attention to things I had been too busy accommodating to notice before. I noticed how he positioned himself away from me in photos. How he edited me out of frame when posting to social media. How he rarely tagged me or publicly acknowledged our relationship. I noticed how he talked about our future in vague terms. Someday and eventually and we'll see. Never concrete plans or definite timelines. I noticed how he made decisions that affected both of us without consulting me first. Where we would live. How we would spend holidays. What major purchases we should make. I noticed how he criticized my reactions to things instead of addressing the actual issues. How he made me feel like my emotions were the problem rather than his behavior. All the small ways he kept me slightly off balance. Always apologizing. Always adjusting. Always trying to be more understanding, more flexible, more accepting. I watched it all with new eyes. Clinical observation instead of emotional investment. And here's what surprised me most. He didn't notice the shift. Didn't see that I had stopped defending myself and started documenting instead. Didn't realize I was no longer fighting to win his approval. He just kept moving through our relationship exactly the same way. Assuming I would keep adjusting to fit whatever shape he needed that day. He felt secure. Confident. Like everything was settled. That's when I knew I had time to prepare properly. A week after his confession, I discovered something that confirmed my worst suspicions. Connor was on his laptop at the kitchen table. He got up to take a phone call, leaving his screen unlocked. I wasn't planning to snoop. But I saw her name in his search history before I could look away. Vanessa Chambers. Multiple recent searches. I scrolled quickly, my heart steady even as what I found made everything clear. He had been looking at her social media profiles regularly. Her professional page. Her personal accounts that should have been private unless they were still connected. He knew where she worked now. Where she lived. Who she was dating. Details about her life he had no legitimate reason to know. The past wasn't past at all. He was actively keeping track of her. Staying updated on her life. Maintaining some kind of emotional connection even though they hadn't dated in years. I heard him ending his phone call. I closed the browser history and stepped away from his laptop. Sat back down at the table with my own work like I had never moved. He came back in, smiling at me, completely unaware that I had just discovered the depth of his ongoing attachment to someone else. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," I replied, returning his smile. But nothing was okay. And nothing was perfect. He was living two emotional lives. One with me physically present, one with her as his mental measuring stick. I was engaged to a man who was still emotionally unavailable. Still anchored to a relationship that ended years ago. Still comparing every moment of his current life to memories of his past. And I needed to know more before I made my final decision. Over the next few days, I asked Connor neutral questions about Vanessa. Curious. Not accusatory or jealous sounding. Just interested in understanding their history better now that I knew it still mattered to him. He answered too easily. Too readily. Like he'd been waiting for permission to talk about her more openly. "We dated for 2 years," he explained. "Met through mutual friends. She was incredible. Smart, funny, always surprising me with something new." "Why did it end?" I asked. "Timing," he said with a sad smile. "She wanted to focus on her career, travel, experience life. I wanted to settle down. We just wanted different things. Do you still talk to her? Not really, he said, but his eyes shifted slightly. Sometimes we comment on each other's posts. Just staying friendly. But I had seen his search history. I knew not really actually meant. I monitor her life constantly but pretend I don't. Would you want to see her again? I asked, keeping my voice light and curious. He hesitated for just a second too long. I mean, if we ran into each other, sure. It would be nice to catch up. But I'm not seeking that out. Every answer revealed more than he intended. The wistfulness in his voice when he described her. The immediate defensiveness when I pressed slightly. The careful framing of their relationship as something that ended due to circumstances rather than actual incompatibility. Truth leaks out when people feel safe. When they think you're not really listening or don't understand the significance of what they're saying. Connor felt safe with me. He thought my questions were idle curiosity, not careful investigation. And he told me everything I needed to know. Wedding planning continued around us like nothing had changed. Invitations were mailed. Final guest counts confirmed. Vendor contracts signed and payments scheduled. But quietly, carefully, I started pausing my financial commitments. I was supposed to make the final payment on my dress that week. I called the boutique and asked if I could delay it 1 month. They agreed without question. The photographer wanted his deposit. I told Connor my paycheck had been delayed due to a company processing issue. Could he cover it and I'd pay him back? He agreed, annoyed but understanding. The venue needed final numbers. I told them I was still waiting for several key RSVPs and needed another week. They granted the extension. Every financial obligation I could delay, I delayed. Every payment I could avoid making, I avoided. Not obviously. Not in a way that would raise suspicions or create problems. I just quietly stopped committing more of my money to a wedding I was increasingly certain wouldn't happen. At the same time, I opened a new savings account Connor didn't know about. Started moving portions of my paycheck there before he could see the full amount. Building a reserve. Creating options. I reclaimed leverage piece by piece. Protected my interests while everyone around me thought I was just busy with normal wedding stress. Connor never questioned any of it. Never noticed I was creating financial distance. He was too focused on his work and his ongoing mental comparison between me and Vanessa to pay attention to practical details. And that inattention gave me the space I needed to prepare properly. As I pulled back emotionally and financially, Connor's behavior shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. He grew critical of me in small, constant ways. He commented on my tone when I spoke. Said I was being harsh or defensive when I was just stating facts. He questioned my reactions to things. Told me I was overreacting or being too sensitive when I expressed any negative emotion. He criticized how I handled household tasks. The way I loaded the dishwasher. How I organized the closet. Where I put things in the refrigerator. Nothing I did was quite right anymore. Every action got analyzed and found slightly lacking. At first I thought I was imagining it. That I was being oversensitive because of what I now knew about his ongoing attachment to Vanessa. But then I realized what was actually happening. As I stopped trying to prove myself and started observing instead. He felt the loss of my effort. My constant accommodation. My flexibility. And his criticism was an attempt to bring me back in line. To make me work harder to please him. To restore the dynamic where I was always trying to be good enough while he held the power to judge whether I succeeded. Comparison had become control. He used his memories of Vanessa as a weapon to keep me uncertain. Always slightly off balance. Always wondering if I was measuring up. Vanessa was better at managing stress, he would say when I expressed frustration. Vanessa didn't take things so personally. He would comment when I reacted to his criticism. Always Vanessa. The perfect measuring stick. The standard I could never quite meet. And every comparison made me more certain I was making the right decision. 2 weeks after his initial confession, I overheard a conversation Connor thought was private. He was on the phone with his best friend Leo, sitting out on our apartment balcony. The door was cracked open just slightly. His voice carried clearly. "I don't know, man," Connor was saying. "Sometimes I wonder if I settled too fast. If I should have waited longer to see if things with Vanessa might have worked out differently." My blood ran cold. I stood frozen in the hallway listening. "Autumn is great," Connor continued. "She's stable and reliable and exactly what I need right now. But is that enough for forever? I keep thinking about what I had with Vanessa. That excitement, that uncertainty, the feeling that anything could happen." "So why are you marrying Autumn?" Leo asked. I couldn't hear the tone clearly, but the question hung there. "Because I'm 34, Connor replied. "I can't wait around forever for something that might never happen. Autumn is here. She's willing. She makes sense logically. I just need to stop comparing, you know? Just accept this is my life now." He framed me as temporary, as the logical choice instead of the desired one, as the woman he was settling for because his real first choice wasn't available. I stepped quietly away from the door, went to the bedroom, closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking now, not with sadness or tears, with pure, cold fury. He was planning to marry me while actively wishing I was someone else. He saw our entire future as something he was resigned to rather than excited about. I was his acceptable compromise, his good enough for now, his logical fallback plan. And he fully intended to go through with this wedding while feeling that way. I needed confirmation, not just overheard conversations that could be explained away or reframed, but solid, undeniable facts about what was actually happening. So I verified carefully, without spying, without drama, just checking the things Connor had told me against reality. He said he rarely talked to Vanessa. I checked our phone records, found regular calls to a number that, when I searched it, matched the contact information on her professional profile. Not frequent but consistent, once every few weeks, always when I wasn't around. He said their connection was purely friendly. I looked at the timestamps of those calls. Late evenings, long durations, not quick catching-up conversations. Deep, extended discussions happening in the margins of our relationship. He said he had moved on, but his internet history told a different story. Regular searches, constant monitoring, an active interest that contradicted everything he claimed. He said I was being insecure when I expressed concerns. But the evidence proved my instincts had been right all along. I documented everything carefully, took screenshots, saved records, not to use as weapons, but as proof to myself that I wasn't crazy, that what I was planning to do was justified and necessary. His story had collapsed under the lightest scrutiny. The narrative he maintained, that his relationship with Vanessa was fully in the past and I was his genuine first choice, simply wasn't true. And once I had confirmed that beyond any doubt, my path forward became clear. I wouldn't confront him, wouldn't give him the chance to explain it away or make me feel guilty for not trusting him. I would just leave, cleanly, definitively, on my terms. I scheduled a meeting with a financial planner under the pretense of getting our finances organized for marriage. Connor thought it was responsible and practical. He even praised me for taking the initiative. "This is exactly what we need," he said when I told him about the appointment. "Getting everything in order before we combine our lives officially." But the meeting wasn't about combining anything. It was about ensuring I could separate everything cleanly when the time came. I went alone, which Connor didn't question. He was too busy with work to attend anyway. The financial planner, Teresa, listened carefully as I explained my situation. Not with judgment, just professional assessment. "What you need," she said after reviewing my documents, "is complete financial independence. The ability to walk away from this relationship without being entangled in joint debts or obligations." We went through everything methodically. Joint accounts that needed to be separated. Bills in both our names that needed to be transferred to single names. Upcoming expenses I needed to avoid committing to. "The wedding deposits you've already paid are likely unrecoverable," Teresa warned. Consider those sunk costs. Your focus now should be protecting your future financial stability. I nodded, accepting that reality. The money I had already spent on the wedding was gone, but I could stop spending more. Could protect what remained. By the end of the meeting, I had a clear plan, specific steps to take, a timeline for executing my exit. Independence felt dangerous, but only to Connor. To me, it felt like oxygen after drowning. Connor noticed my emotional distance about a week later. I hadn't realized how obvious it had become until he confronted me one evening. "You've been different lately," he said, studying my face carefully. "Distant. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Are you sure? You seem withdrawn. Like you're somewhere else mentally." "Just stressed about wedding planning," I offered. "There's a lot to manage." But he wasn't satisfied with that answer. I could see panic starting to creep into his expression. The realization that I wasn't trying as hard, wasn't accommodating as automatically, wasn't bending to maintain peace. "Have I done something wrong?" he asked, his voice taking on an edge of desperation I had never heard before. "No," I said simply. "I'm just tired." He tried to hug me. I allowed it but didn't sink into him the way I used to. Didn't mold myself to his body or seek comfort in his arms. I was polite, distant, functionally present but emotionally removed. And he could feel the difference. Could sense that something fundamental had shifted in how I related to him. Power had shifted quietly, without announcement or confrontation. Just a gradual pulling back of the effort and energy I had been pouring endlessly into keeping him comfortable and happy. He felt the loss of my constant attention, my accommodation, my flexibility, and it scared him in a way my compliance never had. For the first time in our relationship, Connor was uncertain, and I was completely calm. The confrontation came 2 days later. Connor sat me down and accused me of changing, of being different, of not being the person he fell in love with. "You're not the same," he said, frustration clear in his voice. "You used to be so easy to talk to, so understanding. Now you're cold and distant." I looked at him calmly. Didn't get defensive or try to explain myself. "You're right," I agreed. "I have changed." He looked shocked that I admitted it so readily. "Why?" he demanded. "What happened to make you like this?" "I stopped trying to be someone I'm not," I replied simply. "I stopped competing with a ghost. I stopped measuring myself against your memories of someone else." His face went pale. "That's not fair. I've been honest with you about my feelings." "Yes," I agreed. "You have. And I'm being honest with you now. I'm not going to keep trying to win a competition that was rigged from the start." "Autumn, that's not what." "It's exactly what happened," I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. "You told me you compare me to her every day. You've made it clear I'm not your first choice. I'm just the logical option because she isn't available. And I've decided I deserve better than being someone's acceptable compromise." Honesty cut him in a way my compliance never had. My calm acknowledgement of reality instead of desperate attempts to fix things, that's what finally penetrated his defenses. "I love you," he said desperately. "No," I replied quietly. "You love the idea of stability. You love having someone reliable who accommodates you constantly. But you don't love me. Not really. Not the way someone should love the person they're planning to marry." Connor panicked after that conversation. He made promises immediately, swore things would change. "I'll stop comparing you to Vanessa," he vowed. "I promise. I'll delete her from my social media. I'll stop checking on her. I'll focus completely on us." He meant it in that moment. I could see the sincerity in his face, the genuine desire to fix what he had broken. But I already knew it was too late. Not because I was being stubborn or unwilling to give him another chance, but because his promises revealed something he didn't intend. He thought this was fixable. He thought the problem was his behavior, his comparing, his monitoring of Vanessa, his criticism of me. He believed if he just stopped doing those things, everything would go back to normal. But the problem wasn't his behavior. It was how he felt, who he was emotionally attached to, what he genuinely wanted versus what he had convinced himself he should want. You can change behavior. You can modify actions and control what you say and do. But you can't change feelings by making promises. You can't decide to stop loving someone just because it's inconvenient or hurtful to your current partner. Connor was still in love with Vanessa, or at least with his idealized memory of her. And no amount of promising to stop comparing me to her would change that fundamental reality. I appreciate that you want to try, I told him. But it's already too late. What do you mean? He asked, his voice cracking slightly. I mean I've already made my decision, I replied calmly. I'm not going to marry you, Connor. I can't build a life with someone who wishes I was someone else. The color drained from his face as he realized I was serious. What happened next revealed something that shocked both of us. Connor, in desperation, reached out to Vanessa. He called her and told her everything. Asked if there was any chance they could try again. I only learned this because he told me afterward. His face devastated in a way I had never seen. She said no, he explained, sitting at our kitchen table with his head in his hands. She told me she has a serious boyfriend now. She's happy. She never wanted to get back together. He looked at me with something like horror in his eyes. I've been holding on to this idea of her for years, he continued slowly, working through the realization in real time. Building her up in my mind as this perfect relationship I lost. But she moved on immediately. She never looked back. It was just me. Just me staying stuck. His ex never wanted him back. The woman he had been comparing me to for 3 years, the relationship he held up as some ideal he couldn't recapture. She hadn't thought about him in years. She had moved on completely while he built a shrine to their past in his mind. It was never about her, he said quietly. It was about my ego. About not wanting to accept that she chose to leave. That I wasn't enough for her. So I kept her on this pedestal in my mind where she couldn't reject me again. This twist, his sudden self-awareness, came too late to matter. The damage was already done. He had sacrificed our real relationship for a fantasy that never existed. Had hurt me repeatedly in service of an ego wound that was entirely his own creation. His realization didn't undo any of that. It just made the whole situation sadder. Connor proposed counseling immediately. Suggested we create new rules for our relationship. Begged for a reset where we could start fresh with everything out in the open. We can fix this, he insisted desperately. Now that I understand what was really happening, we can build something real. Something not based on comparison or past relationships. It was damage control. Late, desperate attempts to save something he had already destroyed through years of neglect and disrespect. We can't fix this, I told him gently but firmly. Why not? I know what the problem was now. Can change. I want to change. Because the problem isn't just you, I explained. It's me too. Changed. I've realized I deserve someone who chooses me first. Who doesn't need a wake-up call to see my value. Who doesn't have to learn to appreciate me after almost losing me. He looked at me with something like desperation. You're the one I should have chosen all along, he said. I see that now. You're real. We're here. You've been patient and loving and everything I needed. I was all those things, I agreed. Past tense. Because I stopped being those things the moment you told me you compared me to someone else every day. That version of me. The accommodating, patient, endlessly flexible one. She doesn't exist anymore. Then I'll get to know this new version, he tried. I'll love who you are now. But his promises rang hollow. He was trying to save face. Trying to avoid being the villain in this story. Trying to fix things not because he genuinely loved me, but because losing me made him look bad. Made him feel bad about himself. And I refused to save him from that discomfort. I legally withdrew from the wedding contracts the following week. Sent formal cancellation notices to every vendor. Accepted the financial losses on deposits already paid. made it official that this wedding would not be happening. Connor found out last. I had already notified everyone who needed to know before I told him the paperwork was filed. "You cancelled everything?" he asked, his face pale with shock. "Without even discussing it with me?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "Just like you made the decision to compare me to your ex every day without discussing whether I was okay with that arrangement. That's not the same thing." "It's exactly the same thing," I countered. "You made a decision that affected both of us without my consent. I'm doing the same. The difference is my decision protects me. Yours hurt me." He tried to argue that we could still fix things. That canceling the wedding was too extreme. That I was being rash and emotional. "I've never been less emotional in my life," I told him truthfully. "This decision is entirely practical. I refuse to marry someone who sees me as their acceptable compromise." "I don't see you that way anymore," he protested. "But you did," I replied. "For 3 years that's how you saw me. And the only reason you changed your mind was because you lost access to the fantasy you preferred. That's not good enough. That's not what I deserve." He sat down heavily, finally understanding this was real. That I was actually leaving. That his damage control had failed. "I'm keeping the apartment," I added. "The lease is in my name. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live." His face showed shock, then anger, then resignation as he processed that information. He had thought he was in control. But I had been planning for weeks while he scrambled to fix things he had already broken. The begging started after that conversation. But it wasn't the loving, romantic kind of begging where someone fights for the relationship because they can't imagine life without you. It was fearful begging. Desperate attempts to avoid consequences and save face. "What will people think?" Connor asked. "We've sent out invitations. Everyone knows we're getting married. How do I explain this to my family? Not 'I can't lose you.' Not 'I love you too much to let you go.' Just 'what will people think?' Just logistics and appearances and protecting his image." "Tell them the truth," I suggested calmly. "Tell them you were still in love with someone else and I decided I deserved better." "You're going to make me look like the villain," he accused. "I'm going to tell the truth," I corrected. "If the truth makes you look bad, that's not my fault. That's yours." He tried different approaches. Guilt, anger, self-pity, promises. That none of it touched me. I had emotionally disconnected weeks ago. I was just going through the mechanical process of separating our lives now. "You used to be so understanding," he said bitterly. "You used to forgive things. What happened to that person?" "She got tired of being compared to a ghost," I replied simply. "She decided her understanding was being taken for granted. She realized that forgiving someone over and over just teaches them they can keep hurting you." The mask had finally fallen completely. Not just mine, his too. I could see clearly now that Connor had never loved me the way I deserved. He had loved what I provided. The stability, the accommodation, the constant forgiveness. But he had never loved me. I explained my decision to him one final time. Only, clearly. With no insults or unnecessary cruelty. We were sitting in the living room. His suitcases were already packed and waiting by the door. He was moving in with Leo temporarily while he found his own place. "I need you to understand something," I said, looking at him directly. "This isn't about revenge. I'm not trying to hurt you or punish you. I'm just refusing to accept a relationship where I'm the second choice." He nodded, his eyes red from crying. "You're an okay person who did something really hurtful," I continued. "And maybe in the future you'll be better with someone else. Maybe you'll learn from this and not repeat the same mistakes. But not with you," he said quietly. "Not with me," I agreed. "Because you've shown me how you see me. And I can't unknow that. I can't go back to being the accommodating girlfriend who accepts whatever treatment she gets because at least she's being chosen. I do love you," he insisted. "I know I messed this up. But I genuinely love you, Autumn." "Maybe you do," I replied. In whatever way you're capable of loving someone. But it's not enough. It's not the kind of love that makes someone feel valued and chosen and essential. What can I do to fix this? He asked one final time. Nothing, I answered honestly. Some things can't be fixed. Sometimes people make choices that have permanent consequences. You made yours when you told me you compared me to someone else every day. I'm making mine by choosing to walk away. He finally understood the loss. Saw it clearly for the first time. Not the loss of stability or companionship or wedding plans, but the actual loss of me. Of someone who had loved him genuinely and given him everything until he made it impossible to continue. The consequences spread quickly after I made the decision public. Socially, financially, emotionally, friends took sides. His friends called me cold and harsh for leaving right before the wedding. My friends wondered why I had stayed as long as I did. His family blamed me for breaking his heart. My family quietly celebrated that I had found the courage to leave. He lost the respect of several people who heard what he had done. Lost friendships with couples who couldn't stomach his behavior. Lost the image he had carefully cultivated of being a good guy in a mature, stable relationship. Financially, he struggled. The apartment he could afford on his salary alone was significantly smaller and worse than what we had shared. His credit took a hit from breaking shared accounts and obligations. He tried dating. From what mutual friends told me, it wasn't going well. Potential partners would ask about his previous relationship. He had no good answer for why a wedding was cancelled 3 weeks before it happened. The truth made him look bad. Lying made him look worse when the truth inevitably came out. His business suffered because he was too emotionally destroyed to focus properly. Clients noticed his distraction and took their work elsewhere. Every area of his life felt the impact of his choices. And he had no one to blame but himself. I hadn't attacked him. Hadn't tried to destroy his reputation. Hadn't spread malicious gossip or exaggerated what happened. I had simply told the truth when asked. And the truth was damaging enough on its own. 4 months after ending my engagement, I stood in my apartment. My apartment now no longer ours, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The space was lighter, quieter, decorated exactly how I wanted. Every item here was chosen by me, for me, with no compromise or accommodation required. I had reconnected with friends I had drifted away from while prioritizing Connor's needs. I had taken on new projects at work that I had previously declined because they would have created scheduling conflicts with his life. I traveled alone for the first time. Went to places Connor had never wanted to visit. Ate at restaurants I chose without worrying if he would like them. Made decisions based purely on my own preferences. I went on a few dates. Nothing serious yet. But the difference was stark. Men who showed genuine interest in knowing me. Who asked questions about my life and actually listened to the answers. Who didn't measure me against previous partners or make me feel like I was competing for their attention. The absence of comparison felt revolutionary. The simple act of being seen as myself, not as someone who should be more or less like someone else, changed everything. Peace felt unfamiliar at first. Like wearing new shoes that hadn't been broken in yet. I kept waiting for something to go wrong. For Connor to show up or some consequence to emerge that would prove I had made a mistake. But nothing happened. No disasters. No regrets. Just steady, calm, growing peace. Felt perfect. Exactly right. Like I had finally found my way back to myself after years of being lost in someone else's shadow. Connor never reached out again after moving out. No attempts at reconciliation. No dramatic gestures or late-night messages professing undone love. Just silence. I heard through mutual friends that he was struggling. That he had realized too late what he lost. That he understood now he had genuinely loved me and thrown it away through his own stupidity and inability to let go of the past. But he never reached out to tell me any of that directly. Never apologized for how he treated me or acknowledged the pain his comparisons caused. Never took real responsibility for destroying what we had. And I didn't need him to. I didn't need his apology or acknowledgement. I didn't need him to finally see my value now that he had lost access to it. I had chosen myself. That was the victory. Not competing but choosing myself first. I won. Not by being better than Vanessa. Not by proving I was worthy. Not by making Connor suffer or regret. I won by walking away knowing exactly what I deserved and refusing to settle for less. My worth wasn't determined by his ability to see it. My value didn't depend on winning his approval or his comparison ranking. I was enough because I decided I was enough. And that decision, to choose myself, to protect my peace, to walk away from someone who couldn't fully choose me, that was the real victory. He lost everything because he underestimated me. Because he thought I would keep accommodating forever. Because he assumed my patience was infinite and my self-respect was negotiable. I ended this story not heartbroken but free. Self-possessed. Completely untouched by his regret or his belated understanding. Worth reclaimed. Future secured. Peace earned. And I never looked back.